Today on our podcast, we have the first of two monthly news and analysis episodes. This week, we're going to focus on the Florida resort. In our first segment, I'll walk you through the entire resort to discuss what's changing or what recently has changed, and also what various announcements mean for the future of Disney World. In our second section, I'll explore a new restaurant at Epcot, and just a heads up, I think this restaurant is a fabulous addition to World Showcase. And in our last segment, I'll walk you through Moana's Journey of Water, which will open later this month to general guests. I've been through the exhibit twice now, both in the day and at night. I'll point out a number of elements that I think will increase your enjoyment of this experience when you visit it on your next trip to Florida. So this week, we have a lot to cover, focused on the Florida resort, and then next week we'll focus on the California resort, the Disney Studio, and the Disney Company at large. But before we jump into all of the details, I need to thank another round of Bandcamp subscribers, as these are the people who keep this whole enterprise going. Gratitude is going out today to MG Biggs, C. Parrish 5, and Lori. Thanks to each of you and to all of our Bandcamp subscribers for supporting all we do here. And now, let's kick into the show. We'll start today with our walkthrough of the Florida resort, noting what has changed, what is changing, and how the resort is arranging itself for the months and years ahead. Let's begin with Epcot. I remain skeptical that the World Celebration area will be fully open come December. I was in the park this past week, and as I mentioned a month ago, I think it's possible that some outdoor pathways in World Celebration might be open in December, largely to manage crowds, but in terms of the entire area, including structures and indoor spaces, I remain skeptical. The Disney Company is fond of saying that Disneyland was built in under a year, from August 1954 through July 1955. But in this, the Disney Company is actually selling itself short. The McNeil Construction Company spent August through December clearing the land and placing underground elements for the park's infrastructure. At the start of January 1955, the Disneyland construction site was simply a large expanse of dirt still dotted with some orange trees. The only permanent structures then erected were the cement underpinnings for the two railroad bridges on either side of Main Street Station, though the station itself was just a mound of dirt. Aside from that, the entire park was built from just January to July of that year. That is pretty amazing. So it's possible for a much earlier version of the Disney Company, or in this case what was then called Disneyland Incorporated, to move quickly. But the modern Disney Company is slow, exacting, and meticulous. The area behind the construction wall at Epcot is still very much a construction site. Communicore Hall, which is the large structure that will anchor this corner of World Celebration, is far from finished. In places, you can look from the exterior of one side of the building clean through and out to the other side. Some walls are still nothing more than steel beams. There are no finished walls whatsoever on this building, to say nothing of a finished roof. There are plenty of small cranes and lifts positioned around the structure to suggest that work here will continue for many months. Yet, this area has a vague opening date of sometime in December. What's changed recently in this area is that hardscape has been laid near the building, creating usable walkways. For the most part, walkways are among the last things poured in a construction site, so the construction equipment doesn't damage them. To me, what this suggests is the actual plan here is likely to open the exterior areas of World Celebration, that is, the outdoor area directly behind Spaceship Earth, while continuing to work on the structures. These structures, such as Communicore Hall, will someday present live music and cooking demonstrations, as well as art galleries and various interactive displays. But simply opening the outdoor areas probably in December, will help better manage traffic flow and will allow the park to feel a little more finished and less like a maze of construction walls, as has been the case for the past 4 years. Could the Disneyland team from 1955 have finished off this area in a few months? Maybe. But I think it'll be far more likely that despite various official announcements from Disney, that we'll only see a partial opening of World Celebration come December than an opening of the entire area, including Communicore Hall. If I had to pick a date when I thought the outdoor sections would open, I'd pick a date very close to December 15th. Again, for clarity, this is all just one person's educated guess and not an official announcement. And before we push on from this area, I will point out that just on the other side of those construction walls is Moana's Journey of Water. I've been through it twice now, in the day and at night, and we'll talk about that later on this podcast episode. But now let's move to the other side of Epcot, down to the lagoon. I'm far more optimistic that the new fireworks show, Luminous, will be ready or mostly ready for its December 5th premiere. That's just 2 months away. Work continues on the launch platforms and the new barges. During the last week of September, crews moved one of the barges in and out of World Showcase Lagoon for testing. During the first week of October, there were 2 barges out there. We're still many weeks away from a full test of show elements. Right now, I suspect that crews are testing individual pieces of equipment along with the way that the barges anchor to the platform in the center of the lagoon. It also appears that there may be smaller launches inside of each of the main barges that would further extend the show into the lagoon. And from pinching and expanding photos on my phone, it's clear that the barges are arranged with mini air launch tubes. The poster for Luminous shows multiple red shells rising up from the water to form the aerial shape of a heart. Initially, I thought this was more of an interpretive illustration, but in looking at the equipment on the barges, I think this might be a possibility to create a heart that rises up from the center of the lagoon with some tightly timed low-altitude shells. And if this is true, I'm also guessing that this heart will likely be best viewed from the American or Italian pavilion or the promenade entrance to World Showcase, as the heart appears to be a flat object. Now that there are crews out there working on the barges, it's easy to see how tall these barges actually are. They look to be about 3 stories tall. Unlike the barges for Harmonious, these will be piloted into and out of the lagoon each day, leaving sightlines clear around World Showcase for the morning and for most of the afternoon, which is a huge improvement over the hardware used for Harmonious. I've seen these barges many days from the edge of the lagoon, and especially as they have no massive video screens like those Harmonious taco-shaped barges, these are far less noticeable than the equipment that was anchored in the lagoon earlier this year. As far as I can tell, the 6 barges are identical or nearly identical, so 2 barges out there are probably enough to test the capabilities and range of the launch and fountain equipment in the actual lagoon space, though the functionality of the equipment on each barge will of course need to be tested individually. I think that the December 5th opening still represents a tight and ambitious schedule, but to me this looks doable right now. Over by the Magic Kingdom, work continues on the Grand Floridian. This is a multi-year rehab project. The good news is that the lobby, at least for now, is cleared of construction equipment inside. The scrims are down, and it's gorgeous once again. But exterior construction walls and scaffolding have gone up around the lobby building. It circles most of the building except for the side that faces the monorail station. Crews are painting, clearing out landscape areas, and repairing large sections of the roof. The extent of work is noticeable, and also the sounds of light construction are easily heard during the day. And so, if you were looking at the Grand Flow for the next few months, you should probably account for some construction happening around the center of the complex. This refurbishment will continue into 2024. but some of this work will be scaled back during late November and December, so the holidays will look like they always do at the resort, with the traditional gingerbread house in the lobby and the enormous Christmas tree. But then expect another uptick in construction in 2024 as the refurb continues across the resort. If you were looking to book one of the Magic Kingdom area hotel resorts early in 2024, you might think strongly about the Poly or the Wilderness Lodge instead of the Grand Flow. And if you were looking into one of those other hotels, you might want to explore your options here earlier rather than later. The Grand Floridian is positioned in terms of promotional materials as Disney World's flagship resort, and outside of the DVC rooms, it's often the easiest of the Magic Kingdom area resorts to book, but it's not the most popular. I've always put this down to the resort's vibe. The resort has a turn-of-the-century elegance touched with a business-class formality. I think for many, but certainly not for all. The laid-back feel of the Poly or the rustic expanse of the Wilderness Lodge simply blends better with a Disney vacation. The Grand Flow is typically the last of these resorts to fill. And as long as we're talking about other resort hotels, right next door to the Grand Flow is the Poly, which has large-scale construction rising up in the space once occupied by the Spirit of Aloha Theater. This will be a DVC addition to the Poly, a series of modest towers, at least one rising, it appears 10 stories. Disney hasn't yet released the number of studios and villas that the tower will hold, but mid-200s in terms of the number of rooms would be a good guess. It won't open until late 2024, which in Disney speak probably means 2025. Presently, it's a mass of cement. Crews have finished some of the balconies, some exterior windows have been installed as well, but you still can look from one side of the building all the way through to the other, as there's no meaningful interior development yet. I've been over at the Poly many times during construction, and the construction outside of the wedding pavilion area is mostly invisible, also very quiet. At least with the current level of activity, the construction for the Poly edition hasn't detracted much from vacationing at the Poly. This could change over the months ahead, but also it looks like a lot of the large structural work is nearly complete. The new DVC tower is designed to increase the variety of DVC rooms integrated into the Poly. Presently, the Poly has 380 DVC rooms. 360 of them are just one type of room, deluxe studios. At about 460 square feet each, these are the largest DVC studios at the Florida resort. These rooms have open living areas, which include a queen-size bed, a pull-down bed, and a sofa bed, and various chairs as well as a kitchenette. But a typical DVC tower includes studios as well as 1, 2, and 3 bedroom offerings, with the 1 bedrooms being particularly popular. The Polynesian does have some very expensive 2-bedroom bungalows, which are the rooms built on the water, but aside from that, the DVC holdings at the Poly are exclusively studios. Though the number and types of rooms for the new Poly Tower haven't been announced yet, it's expected that the tower will now fill out the range of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom listings typically organized into a DVC resort. Right now, this tower looks like a bunch of industrial blocks of cement, one stacked right next to the other, all of it arranged behind a chain-link fence. It's moving forward quickly, far quicker than Tiana's Bayou Adventure. In the next year or so, landscaping and finishing elements will be added so that it better blends with the current resort. One last thought here. The recent DVC edition over at the Grand Flow, in terms of its visual appearance, did blend well with the older resort once it was done. It added 200 rooms to DVC inventory at the Grand Flow. I have been watching to see if those additional rooms and additional guests have overwhelmed amenities at the Grand Flow, such as restaurants, bars, and the monorail station. I haven't noticed that yet, but the Grand Floridian also has more restaurant seating than the Poly. I'm a little concerned that another 200 or 250 rooms might overwhelm the resources at the Poly, as Ohana is booked out for weeks and Trader Sam's sometimes has a 2 to 3 hour walk-up list. The new tower should also have new dining locations, so hopefully with these new options, these elements will all even out and perhaps might even add a wider cuisine variety to the resort. And as long as we're focused on the monorail loop, let's step into the Magic Kingdom. One of the first things to notice is that the garden statues of the Fab 50 characters, which were placed there for the resort's 50th, are still there, even though the 50th is now over. Not only are they there in the Magic Kingdom, but in the other parks as well. The medallions, which were once emblazed with the number 50, have been removed. I've always felt that aside from the Magic Kingdom, these were unusual additions. Theme parks ask you to engage the illusion that you're in a location far from home, but placing these statues around the park, mostly near the entrance promenade, continually reminds guests that they're in a theme park. For example, Grauman's Chinese Theater over in Hollywood Studios is supposed to be a recreation of an early 20th century venue in Hollywood, but having the statue of BB-8 not far from its doors calls attention to this being a theme park. I'd like to think that ideally the constructedness of a theme park should fade into the background, leaving only the theme there for guests to explore. But regardless, these statues will be sticking around for a while more, though I have heard through the cast member grapevine that Bob Iger isn't a big fan of them. At the back of Frontierland, work continues on Tiana's Bayou Adventure. The water tower is up and topped with a tiara, and the construction fence is marked with a sign that reads Tiana's Foods, and which the sign also announces is employee-owned. And beyond the fence, crews have started to paint areas of the rockwork. It looks like some sections hold a primer, so I suppose this is to test color values to see how the paint will appear once it's applied to rockwork and in full sun. Construction is also active behind the walls, but overall, in walking through this area, I'm still struck with how promotion so far hasn't excited the theme park audience. Promotion mostly has been focused on how this ride will present an authentic Louisiana experience. Also, in terms of community values, how the business represented here is employee-owned, neither of which really are big draws for a theme park audience. If guests wanted an authentic New Orleans experience, they would just go to New Orleans. Theme park guests want something beyond that, a sense of wonder or awe or excitement that they can't find easily in the real world. And so in some ways, the marketing opportunity to announce this project has been a little mishandled because the fan base has not been excited by what's been revealed so far. So I'm hopeful that there will be a promotional reset on this, perhaps after Christmas, with a line of stories better designed to connect with theme park fans. At the moment, it still looks like the work on the Florida version is substantially ahead of the California version. The rockwork at the top of the old Chickapin Hill has been now replaced, and there's a wire frame up there now being formed to create a new peak formation just before that big drop. In order for this ride to open on time, crews will need to be testing this ride exactly 1 year from now, with the flume refilled, the animatronics in place, and the rockwork finished. And that still feels like a very challenging goal. Over at the Haunted Mansion, work continues on the Hatbox Ghost. We've already talked about how the placement of a spirit before the seance scene changes the storyline, as historically ghosts are invisible before the seance scene and only appear once Madame Leota invites them to do so. But there's another issue with placing the Hatbox Ghost just after the endless hallway. That's the hallway with the floating candelabra. There's a lot of theatrical lights in that area, mostly to light show sets. In California, Old Hattie has been placed just after the attic, which is one of, if not the darkest spot in the ride. Because of the low lighting levels after the attic, those working on the design were able to dim out the face so that it appears to fully disappear while lighting a second head placed inside of the hat box. The light goes off for the face, making it invisible, and the light comes on in the hat box, presenting a new face there. But with more environmental and stage lights in the area, the more difficult it becomes to pull off this theatrical effect. I'm guessing that this is one of the challenges installers in the Florida mansion are now facing. How to reconfigure lighting levels in this portion of the ride so that guests can still see nearby stages, but also so the magical effect of Hattie's disappearing head is still believable. With too much light, you will be able to see the elements that create that illusion. During operating hours right now, at this point in the mansion, right after the endless hallway, along the right-hand side of the track, Imagineers have set up a curved curtain wall. The curtain, entirely black, looks almost like a theater curtain with its deep folds and curved sash running along the front. If you didn't know where to look, you'd likely never notice it. This figure should be revealed to the public shortly before Thanksgiving, but I'd expect stage areas around Hattie's location to be dimmed a little to make the effect more believable. Lastly, in terms of the Magic Kingdom Resort area, after 3 years, Disney has reopened the Blue Route boat service from the Contemporary over to the Wilderness Lodge and to Fort Wilderness. We've talked about this before, and in the past, the sticking point has been that funding for this route needed to be supported in part by the operations budget at the Contemporary Hotel, who in previous years have been unwilling to pay for this. But as of October 1st, which is the start of the new fiscal year, the service is back up and running. It's one of the last elements to return to the resort post-pandemic. In addition to general transportation, this boat ride is lovely for an after-dinner cruise around Bay Lake. It's also an easy way to move from the Contemporary to the Lodge and over to Fort Wilderness. If you'd like to see those lovely light and inflatable figure displays, campers arrange around their sites during the holidays. With this, the infrastructure of the resort is starting to feel more connected and whole as it did back in 2019 before the pandemic came down around us. And one final stop of our walkthrough of the Florida resort, and that's over at Disney's Hollywood Studios. The first thing I noticed here after parking was the long-forgotten double beeps of the parking lot trams as they pulled into motion. Both here and over at Epcot, the parking lot trams are back after having been put on hiatus at the start of the pandemic back in March 2020. But what I mostly want to take a look at is inside the park over on Grand Avenue at the entrance to the Muppet Courtyard. There's been a lot of work going on here on and off since the start of summer, but presently there's a large section walled off, behind which the skeletal steel outline of a rectangular building has risen from the ground. Again, through that cast member grapevine, the belief here is that this will become another Joffrey's Coffee. These are typically rectangular structures, just like the one here. There's another rectangular Joffrey's on the other side of the park in Pixar Place, just outside of Toy Story Land, but let me add a couple of other observations to this. Right behind this new structure under construction is the Miss Piggy Fountain. As of about a week ago, Miss Piggy has been removed from the fountain to refurbish and freshen her. There's now that very familiar set of rolling box hedges that have been positioned around the fountain, which indicates that this is a short refurbishment because if it were longer, we'd have wooden barriers there. And right behind that fountain is Muppet Vision 3D. Also this past week, after more than 3 decades, the show has finally received its first surprise update. For the last 32 years, when the Waldo character, that's the computer-animated character who is the spirit of 3D, explodes into hundreds of replicas of itself, those were projected around the theater as static images, little characters slowly moving across the walls. But as of last week, the theater now has a projection mapping system to send out hundreds of individually animated Waldo characters across the theater, each with its own realistic pattern of movement. Beyond this, the fireworks, the fog, and the bubble effects are all working very well once again. That is, Disney is clearly spending money in this area to improve the presentation of the Muppets. So here we have an enhanced version of Muppet Vision 3D, and then a few yards away, the refurbishment of the Miss Piggy Fountain, and then a few yards away from that, a new structure that seems arranged for some type of food service. This, I know, will probably turn out to be yet another rectangular Joffrey's, but at least it's intriguing to consider that it might possibly be something more, something related to the other Muppet upgrades. But to tell the truth, I feel pretty much sure in my gut that the cast member grapevine is likely right, and that this will soon be another fine place for lattes and decaf. If so, I believe that would bring the number of Joffreys to 22 on property. But we'll find out for sure in a couple of months what this will be, because there's still that possibility, if small, that it might be something more. And that brings us up through most of the Florida resort, though I still have a couple more segments to follow that will focus on other changes to Disney World. Next up, we'll take a look at a new restaurant, which I think is pretty great, and a significant step up from the last restaurant to open, which was Roundup Barbecue. Over at Epcot, the Japanese Pavilion has a new restaurant, bringing the offerings there to 4. In the Japanese Pavilion, the upper-end signature restaurant is Takumi Thai, and the quick-service restaurant is Katsura Grill. The remaining 2 are standard table-service restaurants housed above the Mitsukoshi department store. At one end of the building is Teppan Edo, a longtime fan favorite, with its table-side grills and performative chefs. And now at the other end of that same building is Shiki-Sai. It's in the space that was most recently used by Tokyo Grill. The interiors have been refreshed with tables that are either positioned around windows that open to the lagoon or around the open-air kitchen. The wait staff is entirely from Japan, and the kitchen staff is mostly from Japan. During my most recent visit, everyone in the kitchen was from Japan except for one person who was from Korea. So this restaurant has the feel of an old-school Epcot experience, similar to those restaurants that opened with the park back in 1982. I've been to Shiki-Sai 3 times now, twice during previews and once during its general opening. I always try to experience new restaurants at least twice before discussing them here. This one I liked quite a bit, so I went back a 3rd time. Shiki-Sai is an izakaya-style restaurant, which is an informal Japanese restaurant that specializes in casual meals, often with shareable dishes. A good reference point would be a tapas bar or a pub, if dishes at a pub were also shareable. The shareable servings separate Shiki-Sai from other restaurants in the pavilion. Another way that this restaurant distinguishes itself is through the menu. There are simply dozens and dozens of menu items, giving Shiki-Sai one of the largest menus on property, right up there with Haleo. Most of the offerings here fall into one of 4 categories: sushi, noodle bowls and udon, donburi, and Japanese street food such as tempura and fried tofu. The most numerous offerings, though, are sushi. Sushi comes in pieces, rolls, sashimi, and shareable combination platters. I've sampled many items on the menu now, And among my favorites is the Dragon Roll, which is fabulous. It's one of the best and certainly largest dragon rolls I've had at any sushi restaurant. This is the one item that I've ordered twice, once during my first visit and once during my most recent visit. It's large enough so if you're not sharing it, it can be an entree-sized dish. The rolls here, like the sushi pieces, are prepared in an open-air kitchen. You can watch as the eel, already marinated, is crisp in a crisper, the rice is arranged into a roll, and the remaining ingredients, such as shrimp and cucumber, are added. It simply is one of the best dragon rolls that I've had anywhere. If there are many people in your party interested in sushi, one of the sushi combinations or chef's specials might be a better option. Elsewhere on the menu, the karaage chicken is quite good. Karaage chicken is deeply fried, often twice fried, though the flavors will be different than that of American fried chicken. Karaage chicken is made without wheat flour. The chicken is marinated, then dusted with cornstarch, and then fried. It lightly carries the flavors of garlic and ginger. This is Japanese street food and is listed here as a starter. It's also a good option for kids, though I will point out that teppanyaki right down the way might be a better overall choice for families with young children. Also excellent on the starter menu are the tempura items, which are light and crisp. The fish tempura was particularly good. A couple of other standouts were the kushi, which are marinated skewers of meat and shrimp that are grilled. The beef skewer was particularly good. Also, the vegetable udon soup, which has a light, almost herbal flavor, and is a fabulous hot dish even when it's hot outside. Lastly, Shikisai still has wide windows that open to the lagoon. The restaurant is on the second story, so it's easy to see out into World Showcase. The view is lovely during the day, but at night the restaurant offers ideal views of the current fireworks. As we talked about in the first section of today's episode, Epcot has a new nighttime show opening in 2 months. The sightlines here from Shikisai will work well with the new show so long as most of the show is in the air and not down on the barges. If you were to book a table around 8 or 8:30, and if you asked for a window side or window area table, you'd likely be finishing your meal just in time to watch the show while enjoying dessert. In terms of our pricing schedule here, most items on the menu would fall within our moderate range, though it would be easy to push this experience into the expensive range if you focused only on sushi or on a couple of the Wagyu options. Overall, it's a lovely experience both in terms of the layout of space, the international cast members, and the food. And at the moment, because it's new, reservations do tend to go quickly. Last up on our episode today is a review and walkthrough guide for Journey of Water over at Epcot. Journey of Water is the newest attraction at Epcot, a project that took roughly 4 years to arrange and install. Let's start with this. Imagineering is a design organization that teaches itself new skills decade after decade. The first Disney park, which was Disneyland when it opened in 1955, was largely modeled after Hollywood set design. There were no recorded background loops to provide music, there was no theatrical lighting, there were no fireworks. The ground was either asphalt, cement, or bare dirt. But over time, the Disney organization absorbed new skills. In the 1960s, Imagineers studied restaurant design and operations, and the food offerings in the park improved. In the 1970s and 1980s, Imagineering hired a wave of people with a background in live theater, such as Joe Rohde, and Disney incorporated the tools, skills, and effects of theatrical productions into the parks. In the 1990s, Disney explored how hardscape, mostly artistically crafted cement, could be better integrated into new lands. And in the 2000s, Disney utilized the tools of video game design to create parks whose environments were more immersive. Journey of Water incorporates many of these tools into a walkthrough exhibit, from rockwork to landscape, from hardscape design to sculpted characters, from theatrical lighting to area-specific music. It also uses some new tools. But let's start with the basics. Journey of Water is a walkthrough attraction that uses water play stations to teach guests about the natural cycle of water, from rain to stream to rivers, then lakes, and finally the ocean. In this, the feel of the exhibit relates strongly to early Future World displays, such as exhibits about oceanic life at the old Living Seas Pavilion, or the interactive displays of technological play in the old ImageWorks. That is, the creative DNA of Journey of Water is tied back to the DNA of the early Epcot Center. And this brings me up to elements that feel new here. Though the attraction is decorated with characters from Moana and the soundtrack is adapted from the same film, the framework for this experience comes from interactive natural history museums or children's museums. This is the type of exhibit which would be at home in the Exploratorium in San Francisco. By that I mean it uses an extended multi-stage experience to explore scientific principles of the natural world. This type of multi-stage outdoor walkthrough experience centered on scientific principles is a new way to approach the exploration of a topic at Epcot. The walkthrough experience is in the new World Nature neighborhood, which was once part of Future World. This neighborhood also includes the Land Pavilion and the Seas Pavilion. Between these three pavilions, the park now presents an ongoing dialogue focused on the forces of nature and also how humans interact with them. The attraction is a self-guided tour. Once you enter the attraction area, you can move as fast or as slow as you want from station to station. You can also double back and revisit an earlier station. But if you really want to experience each area and explore the attraction's materials, I'd say a half hour is a good amount of time to explore, play, and learn before moving on to something else. As you move through the exhibit, you'll explore an environment that feels similar to the tropical environment of the Polynesian resort, with lush trees, expressive rockwork, and signs whose lettering and images mimic those in Moana. The first station demonstrates the beginning of the water cycle, which is rain. Each station has its own water play area, and here guests are invited to run their hands between rivulets of water that fall like strings on a harpsichord. You can pass your hand through 15 water strings to create an ascending melodic line, or you can pluck individual water strings to produce an individual note. And just so you know, the water strings here are paired with near-invisible light beams. Breaking the light beam, not the water string, actually produces the note. Still, it's an engaging effect. A little further down the path is a station called Stream. In this area is a motion-based exhibit where fountains respond to the movement of your hands, incorporating a tracking technology similar to that used in web slingers out on the West Coast. Raise your hands and the water follows. In this area too, you can see some of the other design themes. The environment includes water pools, tropical plants, and rockwork. But integrated into the rockwork are characters and other visual elements from Moana. At the back of the stream area, arranged into the rock wall, is an image of Maui, specifically the tattoo version of Maui that in the film lives on Maui's actual body. In this way, the exhibit pulls in sculpt elements similar to those developed for the Tree of Life in Animal Kingdom. Characters from Moana are carefully integrated into the rockwork throughout the exhibit, typically 1 or 2 designs for the early areas, and then a half dozen or so in the last exhibit, where children can spend time discovering them. Along the path from entrance to exit are many interactive displays and play areas that depict how water moves through the natural world. In the wetlands, there is both a display of the wetlands as well as a splash area. In the springs area, There is both a springs as well as interactive geysers whose line of water will rise to meet your hand. I should point out that kids, even during the previews, have already figured out that it's great fun to bat the rising line of water with their hands to send spray onto their parents. In every area of the attraction, there are at least 2 paths, if not more, that allow guests wishing to stay dry to remain dry. To this end, the designers have also included one more smart addition to the exhibit, a single family-style bathroom which no doubt will be used by parents to dry off their kids, and for those parents who plan ahead, will be used to change their kids into bathing suits before letting them run through various splash and water play areas. The average daily temperature in Orlando from June to August is in the low 90s. On some days it tops out over 100. In addition to offering an educational and play experience, this exhibit also performs another function. It allows kids to cool down in the middle of a hot afternoon. The centerpiece icon of the area is a 16-foot statue of Te Fiti, the nature goddess in Moana who gives life to the islands and the sea. Here she looks over a pool arranged with leapfrog fountains. These are modern adaptations of those leapfrog fountains that first appeared at Epcot Center when it opened back in 1982. Much to Disney's surprise, those original leapfrog fountains, a technology that premiered at Epcot, were one of the hits of opening year. Now, a more recent version of that technology is integrated into this exhibit. The final interactive station is themed to the ocean, which has many interactive exhibits. At the largest, 10 people need to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, and when the cast member indicates, raise their hands in unison. In response, motion tracking equipment will signal fountains to create an oceanic wave about a dozen feet high to rise up over the rocks. In terms of a visual sense of awe, this is the most impressive station in the attraction. This is also the area that has the largest number of characters sculpted into the rockwork, including the Kakamora. That is the tribe of pirate coconuts featured in the film, some of whom now spit water at guests. I've been through the exhibit both during the day and at night. If you have kids, the best time to visit is during the heat of the afternoon. But if you'd like to explore the visual aesthetic of the displays, the best time is at dusk as Disney controls the environment with theatrical lights which transform the area into a colorful wonderland. The steam and fog, central to some exhibit areas, are also more noticeable once the sun goes down. If I had to take a guess, I'd bet that guests use Journey of Water more as a water play area during the day and more as an interactive exhibit focused on nature in the evening, but again, I could be wrong. The entire exhibit is well arranged with interesting designs on the hardscape. For example, the footprints of Hey left in the cement lead to a rockwork presentation of that confused chicken. The sightlines are also well considered. Spaceship Earth at many locations rises in the background like a man-made moon hovering on the horizon. And the music loops tie the experience together with Polynesian melodies adapted from the film. I don't think many people will book a special trip to Disney World just to experience Journey of Water. But if you're in Epcot, this is a lovely way to spend a half hour, an attraction that adds a new category of experience to the park. Journey of Water will officially open to all guests on October 16th, 2023. A couple of things before I go today. First of all, I've started a blog to support our podcast. This comes from a few suggestions. First of all, from Troy, who suggested that a short blog may be useful in addition to the material arranged into the audio podcast. And second, from a few regular listeners who wanted to see images of elements discussed on our show. So over on the blog right now is an article with many photos that show Journey of Water during both the day and at night. So if you'd like to see those elements of Journey of Water discussed on today's episode, head over to our blog. It's at DHIpodcast.com. And the blog, at least as we start off with it, is just an extension page on my personal website. But there are photos of a bunch of areas to illustrate specific elements in our discussion today. I'll also leave that link to our blog in the show notes. Next, I'll be back next week with a new episode. Next week, we'll focus on news related to the California resort and the Disney company at large, including the studios. Lastly, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes. But the best reason to join is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can become a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave that link down in the show notes as well. So, until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.